Thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here. We're ready to go. I want to just take a moment before we get into our comments to just reflect on the horrific violence coming out of Saskatchewan and how families and friends of those that were killed in this brutal way must be reeling, and how difficult that is. I just want to take a moment to reflect on that. Our thoughts are with the families that are reeling with this loss, and we know there's a lot of questions about the response, and those are important questions that need to be answered, the response from the police and the RCMP, and those are important questions that we want the families to be able to get some understanding about what happened and what can be done to prevent this in the future. Je veux commencer en reconnaissant les actes horribles, la violence qui s'est passée en Saskatchewan. Nos pensées sont avec les familles qui étaient frappées par cette violence horrible, et on sait qu'il y a des questions que les communautés soulèvent par rapport à la réponse de la police. Je comprends que ces questions sont importantes et je veux voir des réponses pour s'assurer que cet acte horrible ne jamais se reproduise dans l'avenir. I want to talk about what we've been doing throughout the summer. My team, New Democrats, have been hearing from people across the country throughout the summer. And what has become very clear is that people are having an incredibly difficult time putting food on the table, paying their bills. Things are getting very difficult. And families are doing everything right. They're working hard, but they continue to fall behind. And people need respect. People need the respect of being able to work hard and be able to put food on the table, support their families, pay their bills. But that is not the case. We're seeing around the world, though, countries have acknowledged that people need help in this time, that the cost of living going up, the inflation that's going up, requires giving people some support. So Spain has put in place some significant steps to support families, making transit free, sending financial support to families directly. Germany has taken steps. Even the United States has passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes measures to support workers. But here in Canada, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have been too busy saying it's better in Canada and worse everywhere else. Well, that doesn't help a family that can't afford their groceries. They've been too busy saying it's not their fault. We're not claiming it's the government's fault, but it is their fault if they don't respond by helping people, by supporting people, by giving people the respect they deserve. And so we are the only party willing to call out in this inflationary period where the cost of living is going up, that corporate greed is directly responsible for a portion of the cost of living going up, and that we have to tackle corporate greed. We've got wealthy CEOs, greedy CEOs, that are not paying what they owe, and workers whose wages are not keeping up with inflation. And what makes matters worse is, today we've seen an announcement that the Bank of Canada is going to increase interest rates by 0.75. That's going to make it even harder for workers who are struggling with their mortgage, who are using their credit cards to pay their bills, to pay their groceries. It's going to make things even harder. What makes matters worse is we've got a Bank of Canada that says that employers should not increase wages to keep up with inflation. That's absolutely wrong. We know that the Bank of Canada is independent, and we respect that, but there are real consequences to workers, and there are real impacts to families when the cost of living goes up, and when the interest rate increases are the only solution, it means families are hurt. And that's why we're calling on this government. We're demanding this government put in place real supports to give people respect. And so we're calling for three specific things. We want to see the GST tax credit doubled. We want to see the Canadian Child Benefit increased, and we want to see the Canadian Housing Benefit increased as well. These are concrete steps that will put support to families that need it. This will give respect to people that are right now having a difficult time, feeling squeezed by the cost of living going up. And this is our solution that goes beyond just seeing interest rates increase, which is going to, again, put more pressure on families without any help in sight, without any respect in sight. This makes it even harder. So we're calling for these concrete steps. We're demanding that this government step up to provide real help to people, real support to people in this time. Donc, notre équipe, nos députés incroyables, pendant tout cet été, ont parlé avec les gens. Et les gens, les familles ont partagé comment c'est difficile à rejoindre les deux bouts. Comment c'est difficile à acheter l'épicerie, comment c'est difficile à payer les factures. Et dans ce temps d'inflation, on est la seule partie qui note, c'est la richesse, les grandes entreprises gagnent des profits énormes en même temps que les familles ont de la misère à payer les factures, à acheter l'épicerie. Et on a vu dans les autres pays, comme l'Espagne, l'Allemagne et aussi aux États-Unis, où les gouvernements ont livré l'aide directement aux familles. Mais ici, au Canada, Justin Trudeau veut s'excuser que ce n'est pas notre faute. C'est pire dans les autres pays. C'est meilleur ici au Canada. Mais tout ça ne fait rien pour les familles qui ont les grands défis à ce moment. Donc, on demande à ce moment que le gouvernement livre l'aide aux familles, donner le respect aux familles, et on a 3 mesures spécifiques qu'on demande que le gouvernement fasse. Premièrement, on doit augmenter le crédit d'impôt pour la TPS. Deuxièmement, on doit augmenter l'allocation canadienne pour les enfants. Et finalement, on doit augmenter le bénéfice canadien pour le logement. Ce sont les mesures concrètes pour aider les familles, pour donner le respect, et on demande que le gouvernement agisse. Parce que dans ce temps, c'est inacceptable que la seule réponse de cette crise d'inflation, c'est d'augmenter les taux d'intérêt parce que ça va frapper fort sur les familles. Donc, on demande les actions concrètes pour aider les gens, des actions concrètes pour donner le respect aux travailleurs, et on continue de toujours se battre pour les familles, pour les gens. Merci. With that, I'm ready for any questions that you might have.
Mr. Singh, what are your expectations and hopes for this fall as you head into Parliament today?
I'll respond to that question.
We'll just let her do it again for the mic.
Yeah, do it for the mic.
Just ask it, please.
Mr. Singh, what are your expectations and hope for this fall sitting?
What we've done throughout minority parliaments is make sure that we are there for people. And when we've heard people hurting, when people are struggling, we've been the ones fighting to get supports, respect to the families. And so what we're hoping to do in this fall sitting is to continue to do exactly that. While people are hurting because of the cost of inflation going up, we need to respond. And we're calling for specific things. We need to make sure that wealthy CEOs start paying what they owe. We want to make sure that families get the respect they deserve. We know that people are working hard in this country and are falling behind. No matter how much they do exactly what they need to do and do everything right, they still feel like they're not getting ahead and that they're falling behind. We want to make sure that these families and people across this country get that respect. And we know we can do that. And we can deliver some concrete steps to achieve that respect. And we've laid out some of those things. We also want to make sure that people get the dental care that we fought so hard to force this government to deliver. This government was never going to do it, voted against it just a year ago, and we forced them to deliver something that's going to make Canadians' lives better. And so we're going to continue to force this government to do what's right for people.
Thank you. It's Lindsay Armstrong with the Canadian Press. And for my follow-up, how stable is your deal with the Liberals, given the relatively short deadlines they now face for key items like dental care and housing support?
Well, our priority is making sure people get help. And so that's the lens through which we view how we move forward in the fall session. We're going to continue to force this government to deliver for people. And if they do not do what people need, if they do not deliver on what people need at this time, then we've got the tools to respond. And there will be repercussions. But our focus is people sent us to Ottawa to work for them. They sent us to Ottawa to deliver for them, and that's what we're doing. We are delivering for Canadians. We are forcing this government to do what's right for people, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
And for a final follow-up, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Chris Rance, Parliamentary Bureau of the CBC. Just listening to what you're saying, I believe Mr. Macklem, the Government Bank of Canada, was trying to put a stop inflation from running away. I believe you're encouraging all union negotiations from now on to go for large increases and to increase workers' wages, which would understandably increase inflation, correct? Is that what you're trying to say?
We reject the approach that it is somehow okay when the cost of living goes up for workers' wages not to keep up with that. In no way does that make any sense that workers should have to bear the burden of the cost of living going up, when we see wealthy corporations making excess profits, making record profits on the backs of people. So our approach is very different. We don't think that it is appropriate to put the burden on workers when we see clearly on an evidence basis corporate greed driving up inflation. There's nothing being done there. We understand that the Bank of Canada is independent, but I am deeply concerned that the approach is don't increase wages for workers, increase interest rates, which is going to put more burden on the backs of workers' shoulders, and do nothing about corporate greed. Do nothing about the fact that clearly corporate grocery stores and big box retail stores are increasing their prices beyond the increased cost to make record profits, and nothing is being done about that. And no other party has the courage to call that out. That's a problem. What we are committed to do is making sure people live a good life. And that means having wages that allow them to pay for the things that they need and support their families. And that's our position. Donc, dans ce temps, je veux clarifier et je veux répéter qu'on accepte que le Banque du Canada est indépendant. Mais on a des réponses on a des critiques sur leur approche. Leur approche, c'est augmenter le taux d'intérêt, qui va augmenter plus de pression sur les épaules des travailleurs. Leur approche, c'est de ne pas augmenter les salaires des travailleurs, même si le coût de la vie augmente. Mais en même temps, il fait rien ou dit rien sur le fait que les profits excessifs des grandes entreprises augmentent le coût de la vie. Ils n'ont rien à dire sur ce sujet. Notre approche, c'est de s'assurer que les ultra-riches paient leur juste part et qu'on a une société où les travailleurs peuvent rejoindre les deux bouts, peuvent gagner un but de respect, de dignité. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va continuer de se battre pour réaliser.
Switching to Saskatchewan and the James Smith Cree First Nation, I'm wondering, have you spoken to folks there? Are you planning to visit? Or what sort of support could you give? And just also putting your lawyer's hat on, how could you see the prime suspect be at large, not being able to be detained, and so on? I'm just asking you to expand on the subject.
Sure. One of the major concerns that has come to light in reference to Saskatchewan, first of all, again, this is horrific. The violence is horrific, and the toll on families, on families that have lost their loved ones, is just something that is so hard to even comprehend. And our thoughts, again, are with those families that are reeling with this loss. Some of the things that have come to light, one major concern is the individuals in question were on parole and had not responded or not been in contact with a parole officer, and should have not been on the streets in this particular specific example. And that's something that's a legitimate question. Why were they not immediately apprehended once they were breaking their conditions of parole? And that's a real question, and that should not have been allowed to happen. That is something that people are worried about, and rightly so. Broadly speaking, we want to provide any support possible to questions around the RCMP response, where people are worried that the response was less than what was adequate to make sure people were safe. And those questions are legitimate, and those are questions that are being raised in other communities as well. And we're, as a party, always open to any way we can to support in improving the response for community safety, in making sure people are safe in their communities, and making sure at this time that we are there for the people of Saskatchewan.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. The deadline in the supply and confidence agreement between the NDP and the Liberals for dental care for 12 and under with the financial conditions, it's approaching. But what progress has been made, and what would you consider honoring the deal? Can you describe, do we have to have our first 12 and under having this dental care program accessible before December 31st? Like what shows you the Liberals are actually honoring this deal?
What we force this government to do is to make sure that kids under 12 can have their teeth looked after by the end of this year. That's what we're going to force them to do. We are very confident that that's going to be achieved, but we have tools, and there will be repercussions if that is not achieved. But we're very confident that will happen. We've been in constant contact. We've been working throughout the summer to force this government to deliver on this. And I want to be very clear. This government voted against dental care as recently as a year ago. They teamed up with the Conservatives both to vote against dental care. They did not want to do this. They were not planning on doing this. This wasn't something that they needed a little nudge to do. We forced them to do this. And we are going to force this government to do more than just dental care. We're going to force them to deliver help for people in this time of crisis where people are struggling to pay their bills or people are feeling squeezed by the cost of living going up. We're going to force this government to get help to people. And we're going to force this government to help people when it comes to the supports they need with housing, with the Canadian housing benefit, which is also something that we force this government to deliver by the end of this year. And those are two things that, these are three things that we're going to make sure this government delivers, and we've got the tools and the pressure that we have to achieve this.
So things are close. That's what I hear. Dominic LeBlanc also says that there's 27 points that he says are moving along very well in terms of the back and forth between the Liberals and the NDP. Is that an assessment that you'd share? Is the NDP and the Liberals, are they moving forward with this deal that would keep Parliament, in its current place, not having an election before June of 2025? Do you feel confident that that's a possibility?
I feel confident in my team. And if it wasn't for this incredible team, this government would not be delivering. They are fighting this government every step of the way to deliver on what Canadians need. If I didn't have these great 24 MPs on our team, we wouldn't be seeing the results. What we're seeing is our New Democrat team pushing and fighting to get results for Canadians, and we're seeing some progress. And I'm looking forward to being able to make sure kids get that support by the end of this year, that families that need help with their housing get that help, that families that are feeling the squeeze of the inflation right now and the cost of living that's going up will get support, will get respect. We are looking forward to making sure that happens. But we're going to fight for more. We know that there's a lot more that people need. There's a lot more that people need respect and support for, and we're going to fight to make sure that we do everything possible to get that to people.
Rice Patel, the Toronto Star. The Conservatives are going to be electing a new leader in a few days. Many believe that'll be Mr. Poilievre. How are you preparing for his potential victory?
Well, what we've seen with the Conservatives is something it's not going to change under Pierre Poilievre. Let's look at some of the concrete positions they've taken. They voted against dental care. They're opposed to making sure kids get the help that they need. That's something that they're going to continue to oppose. That's not in line with what Canadians need. They voted against making wealthy CEOs pay what they owe. And you're not going to see Mr. Poilievre change that position. They have constantly sided with the super wealthy. They might say one thing, but when it comes down to it, they have voted consistently to support those at the very top, and it ends up hurting people. Now, what we are going to do, and what makes us different, is we've actually delivered real help to people. We have forced this government to get real help to people. We're forcing this government to make sure kids under 12 get their teeth looked after. We are forcing this government to actually get help. While Mr. Poilievre talks about the cost of groceries going up, has he once mentioned the corporate greed that has driven up the cost of living? Never, because he's not going to go after the corporate greed and the wealthy CEOs, because that's whose side he's on. He's on their side. We're on the side of people. We're on the side of families. We're on the side of workers. We're a workers' party, and we always will be. And we have shown concretely in real ways how we have made people's lives better and how we will continue to do that in real ways. Not just with words, not just with nice videos, but with real concrete results. We're going to make sure people get their teeth looked after. We're going to make sure families get respect and dignity to be able to afford their groceries and put food on the table. And we're going to make sure that people get help when it comes to their housing. Real help for people. That's what New Democrats deliver. Conservatives have made it clear whose side they're on. They've been constantly and consistently on the side of CEOs and the wealthy, and they've not been there for families. We are here for you.
Mr. Poilievre has spent much of his campaign, though, focused on the working class, and as a leader of a party based on workers' rights, what's your response to that?
Well, it's just a lot of fluff. If you look at what he said and what he's done, they just don't align. He's not an ally for the workers. He's not someone that supports workers' needs. Workers need to make sure that their kids can get their teeth looked after. He's voted against that, and he's going to continue to vote against that. He's shown again and again that he's not willing to make CEOs pay their fair share. He's not willing to call out corporate greed. but he talks a lot about working class issues. If he's not willing to back it up with action, then it's just a lot of the same thing that we've seen before. We are the only party saying corporate greed is driving up inflation. We're the only party saying that workers deserve respect and dignity with real help right now. You know, it's not going to help a worker if you put out a video, but you're not actually going to get them any money in their pocket. We are going to get families money in their pockets so they can pay their bills, so they can support their families. That's what makes us different.
Bonjour, Adrien Blanc, Radio-Canada. Vous allez beaucoup discuter pendant ces prochains jours et réfléchir à cet accord conclu avec les libéraux. Est-ce que vous êtes prêt, au bout de ces discussions, à décider que finalement les libéraux ne tiendront pas leurs promesses et être prêts à renoncer à cet accord?
On est toujours prêt à prendre des actions si le gouvernement ne fait pas ce qu'il faut pour aider les familles. On a toujours dit qu'on a ce pouvoir, on a le pouvoir de forcer ce gouvernement de faire ce qu'ils ont promis de faire, de forcer ce gouvernement de livrer l'aide pour les familles. Et s'il ne le fait pas, on a des réponses. Et on est toujours prêt d'utiliser ces réponses et outils. Mais je veux être clair, ce qu'on va voir dans les prochains mois, c'est les résultats de nos efforts comme une équipe. On a forcé ce gouvernement de faire des avancements pour les familles, des soins dentaires, l'aide pour les familles qui ont de la difficulté avec leur logement et l'aide pour les familles dans ces temps difficiles avec le coût de la vie qui augmente. On va livrer les marchandises comme on a fait dans la pandémie. On va continuer de livrer l'aide directe aux familles et on va continuer de se battre pour les familles et pour plus d'aide et plus de respect pour les familles.
À la rentrée, on pourrait voir Pierre Poilievre comme chef du Parti conservateur. Est-ce que vous ne craignez pas que Justin Trudeau, que son attention se tourne plus vers ce nouveau chef du Parti conservateur que vers vous et vos demandes?
On a forcé ce gouvernement de faire des choses et on va continuer de mettre la pression pour réaliser l'aide pour les familles. Si les libéraux veulent cibler les conservateurs et si les conservateurs veulent continuer d'attaquer le gouvernement, on va continuer de cibler les familles et comment les familles ont besoin de respect, comment les familles ont besoin d'aide. Et notre but, ce n'est pas d'attaquer un parti ou un chef ou l'autre. Notre but, c'est d'aider les familles, de livrer la marchandise pour les familles, livrer l'aide, de répondre aux besoins des familles, d'écouter les gens et puis se battre pour réaliser ce qu'ils veulent. Ça, c'est la différence entre nous et les autres partis. Les autres partis, comme vous avez déjà vu, veulent seulement jouer un jeu politique. Pour nous, c'est comment on peut aider les vies des gens.
Brian Flynn with All Nova Scotia. Mr. Singh, I'm wondering what specific action you're looking for the government to take to deal with corporate greed as you describe it, and what you're prepared to do to compel that action.
Well, what we've seen in some other countries around the world gives us some examples of what can be done. We've called for an excess profit tax, looking at the fact that certain companies and certain corporations have just made profits by being in the right place at the right time. This windfall has benefited the oil and gas sector, for example, who've made massive profits. Some companies have seen higher profits now than in 30 years. And so other countries have said, well, this windfall needs to be taxed, and so it's invested back into people. That's one concrete solution. And we've seen Spain do that. Spain, as I mentioned, is delivering help directly to families, as well as making transit free, and they're paying that with an excess profit tax. Germany has also put in place measures to deliver help to families. And so what we're saying is the burden of the cost of living going up shouldn't fall on the shoulders of workers. And that's what's going to happen if there's no other step taken. If the only response to the cost of living going up and the inflation going up, if the only response to that is the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates, then all that's going to happen is that workers are going to suffer. Workers are going to struggle. And that, to me, is the wrong approach. And so what we're calling for are specific measures tailored to giving people help, giving people respect, the ones I've outlined, GST increase, the tax credit increase, That's giving more money to people, putting more money in their pockets. The child benefit increase, the Canadian housing benefit increase. These are clear, concrete measures to put help into the pockets of people, respect that people need. And in addition, we're saying let's tax the excess profits and the windfall profits of these corporations and make CEOs pay what they owe. And those are real concrete ways that we can help people out and shift the pressure that's been put on the shoulders of workers onto those that should pay what they owe.
Since you're in Nova Scotia, I'll try a Nova Scotian question.
Sure.
The biggest federal provincial issue we've seen over the summer is carbon pricing, and the province was really looking for an exemption from carbon pricing. They had a plan that they said would reduce emissions without a price. The federal government said last week, no go on that. Just wondering what your position is on that.
Well, we of course know that we need to take steps to make sure we tackle the climate crisis, and that's something we of course support. But we take a different approach when it comes to how we help people out. That's why we laid out real concrete steps that will lessen the burden of the cost of living on families. We need to help families out. We need to give families respect. We've also called for specific waivers like getting the GST off of home heating. That's something that's going to specifically help folks in Nova Scotia. As folks know, a lot of home heating is done by oil, by heating oil, and a lot of obviously reliance on natural gas. Giving families that GST break on home heating is something we've long called for, and in this time would be an additional support that would help people in a meaningful way. But we acknowledge and recognize that people need respect, they need support, and that's why we're calling for concrete ways to put money back in people's pockets so that they can actually pay for the things that they need. And an additional measure to take GST off of home heating would be very helpful here in Nova Scotia and help the people that are feeling the squeeze because of the cost of living going up.
David Thurton, CBC News. It's good to be with you in your caucus here in Halifax.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask you about a question about telcos. Do you want to see an agreement between the government and telcos to make sure that millions of Canadians aren't left without cell service, as we saw this summer with Rogers? And what would you like to see in that agreement?
Well, there's a lot that we need to see. We've done a lot of work on this file. Our team and our critics has done a lot of work around what can we do to make it so that Canadians aren't paying the highest fees in the world when it comes to cellular service and data service particularly. So there's a lot that needs to happen. One, we want to make sure that we do not allow the merger to happen. That merger between Shaw and Rogers would be horrible for Canadians, so that's something we're opposed to. We want to see major changes so that we can allow low-cost options into Canada, and some clear legislative changes would allow that to happen. Similar changes that actually happen in the States could be brought into Canada, which would allow for more low-cost options. We absolutely agree there should be some form of agreement that if ever cell service is not available with one provider, that there's an easy rollover system so that those services don't get discontinued. And the reason why that's so vital, as everyone already knows, right now relying on internet connection and cellular service is vital for people's work, for access to education and educational services for a lot of people, for healthcare and other services. People need access to the internet to access many services these days. So it is vital that people have access to their cellular and internet services, and having in place a system where if there's an outage, there's a smooth rollover to a backup plan is vital. Canadians should absolutely have access to such a program, and it's something that the federal government has the power to force. It's fully regulated under the federal government. This is a jurisdiction that's completely federal, and we absolutely need to see more happen. We've seen Liberals and Conservatives for too long cozy up to the big telco companies, and as a result, Canadians have had to pay the price, and that's wrong.
Totally different questions about dental care. You're saying that you need to see kids covered by the end of this year. Is that the end of this fiscal year, which could give the government some time until April of next year to get this, to give that coverage? Or do kids, by the end of December, should they be able to walk into a dental clinic and be able to get their teeth fixed? Can you just kind of clarify that and tell us, when you need to see this happen?
Well, from the beginning, when we forced this government to deliver on dental care, We knew that the timelines were very tight, and so we allowed for, we were open to the way that this was delivered, and we remain open to the way that it's delivered. But functionally, what should happen by the end of this year, kids that need to get their teeth looked after should be able to do that. And we allow some flexibility and are open to the way that that's delivered, but that has to happen by the end of this year. And by the end of next year, the second phase of dental care, kids under 18, seniors, people living with disabilities, that has to be delivered in a program, and we are closely monitoring this. We've been working throughout the summer. I'm going to give a shout out to our critic on healthcare who's been working throughout the summer on this. This is something that we are going to make sure this government delivers on, and if they don't, there are repercussions that will happen.
So that's December 31st.
End of this year, yes.
This concludes the press conference. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Merci. Thank you.
Hey.